Hello, friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Before we take you to your favorite Sports History Network show, just want to tell you a little bit about some merch that you can pick up that represents your favorite SHN podcast. So far, there's t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even books from some of the authors that do podcasts right here on SHN. Who could buy something better than that, than have the history right from the gentleman that you hear talking about it? But we also are adding things each and every day. And where's that store, may you ask? Well, it's at SportsHistoryNetwork.com. Up at the top, there is the SHN merch button. Click on that. It'll take you right to the store, and you can be representing your favorite podcast and show the world that, hey, on the swag that I'm using, it's the headquarters of sports yesteryear, Sports History Network, and my favorite podcaster, the Sports History Network store. Shop there today.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday's Sports on the Sports History Network. Last week, in Part 1, we discussed the 1983 Washington Redskins regular season. In Part 2, today, we're going to discuss their playoffs and Super Bowl. So, on New Year's Day, 1984, the Redskins annihilated the Los Angeles Rams 51-7 at RFK Stadium. The Skins defense held Eric Dickerson to 16 yards rushing, while John Riggins ran for 119 yards and scored 3 touchdowns. Joe Theismann completed 18 of 23 passes for 302 yards with 2 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. 6 of those completions were caught by Charlie Brown, who gained 171 yards. The following week, the Redskins played the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game at RFK Stadium. The 49ers had won the Super Bowl 2 years earlier, but they had struggled in 1982, and 1983 was not a great year for them either. They finished the regular season 10-6 and barely got by a very average Detroit Lions team in the playoff game. Most people thought Washington would have no trouble defeating the 49ers, and those predictions seemed accurate when the Skins took a 21-0 lead in the third quarter. But 49ers quarterback Joe Montana, who had not been having a good game, suddenly got hot. And before you knew it, the game was tied 21-21. Mark Mosley, the Redskins kicker, was having the worst game of his career, going 0 for 4 on field goal attempts. But he made good on his 5th attempt, giving Washington a 24-21 victory. As had been the case for most of the season, the Redskins defense did an excellent job of stopping the run, but they allowed 347 yards through the air. John Riggins gained 123 yards against the 49ers defense, but it took him 36 carries to do it. Receiver Charlie Brown had another outstanding performance, catching 5 passes for 137 yards. Some felt the 49ers were robbed because of some questionable defensive pass interference calls. Interference penalties are usually the most controversial plays and biggest game changers, as we just witnessed in the recent Super Bowl. On a personal note, I'd like to see a rule change that would make an interference penalty a maximum of 20 yards, unless it is blatant. As the rule stands now, it is a penalty at the spot of the foul, which means there is an assumption that the receiver would have caught the ball. That hardly seems like a fair assumption to make. But assuming that the 49ers would have won the game if not for those controversial penalties hardly seems fair either. The Redskins marched into Super Bowl 18 with an impressive 11-game winning streak, and their 16-2 record was not the result of a weak schedule, as only 7 of their 18 opponents had a losing record. Their opponents were the Los Angeles Raiders, and the Redskins had narrowly defeated LA in a Week 5 matchup. While the Raiders were undoubtedly a good team, finishing the regular season with a 12-4 record, they were not what one would consider a dominant team. However, they had handled their 2 playoff opponents relatively easily, beating the Steelers 38-10 and the Seahawks 30-14. Still, most had predicted a Redskins victory in the Super Bowl. No one who played on the Redskins team can explain their poor performance on that fateful day. Perhaps the team had lost its confidence after almost blowing a 21-0 lead against the 49ers in the championship game. Whatever the reason, the Raiders completely dominated the Skins in every phase of the game, winning 38-9. The Redskins' defense, which had done an excellent job of stopping the run all season, allowed rookie running back Marcus Allen to run wild. Allen finished the game with 191 yards on 20 carries, scored 2 touchdowns, and was named the game's MVP. John Riggins, who had gained 1,347 yards during the regular season and broke an NFL record with 24 rushing touchdowns, was a non-factor, gaining just 64 yards on 26 carries. League MVP Joe Theismann finished the game with a dismal 45.3 passer rating and was sacked 6 times. It was a disappointing end to an otherwise great season. On a positive note, the Redskins, under the leadership of head coach Joe Gibbs, would win 2 Super Bowls in the next 8 years. That will conclude our podcast for the 1983 Redskins. I hope that you enjoyed it. Take care and God bless.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.